Welcome back to Close Encounters of the Blurred Kind, your guide to all things black and nerdy. I'm Rynn.
I'm Weaver.
I'm Parker.
And we have a special guest today.
I'm Kenna. Hi, everybody.
Kenna! Yay! We're so excited. Kenna! This is our first guest of the season, and we're like really pumped. This is like what long before when we were in the early planning stages, even before like Parker and Weaver hopped on. I was like, okay, so Kenna's gonna be on this, and then
Kenna's so cool.
I'm honored.
So cool.
I'm honored.
Kenna and I
I'm
are
starstruck right now.
Right. Kenna and I are both part of the Primordium reading group. We're co-hosts, and a couple weeks ago, Kenna, the co-hosts rotate throughout the month choosing the reading, and we do like a read aloud on Twitch, and then we have a group discussion in a Discord server that you can access by subscribing to one of us on Patreon. But a couple weeks ago, Kenna's topic was black horror and like how it's become like the most powerful cinematic genre, and we talked about that, and we talked a little bit about Atlanta and Afro-surrealism and Jordan Peele movies. And since this is the episode that's gonna be coming out like immediately prior to Halloween, we thought that this would be like perfect for you to come and like expand some more on those topics, because like I think the very first of your TikToks I ever saw was about Get Out. You were specifically describing the scene where he's like scratching at the arm of the chair and like the cotton stuffing is coming out, and I just watched Get Out for the first time last night, and I like when it got to that scene I was like, oh, that's the thing Kenna told me about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that your videos on black horror like are some of them. I mean, I've been following you for years now, but that's one of the most like interesting topics that you cover. Like, I never even really thought of black horror as being a separate genre, and if I were to hear the term, I would have just thought like, like especially dark horror or whatever, or even just horror movies that feature black people. But the specification that like black horror is not just like has black actors in it, but it's specifically written from the perspective of a black person and covering black issues is just so significant, and that's in connection to the whole like Jordan Peele, and like I love Jordan Peele's movies and stuff like that, and they all, even if they talk about other social elements and aspects, have such an undercurrent of like only a black person could have written this story the way that it is written.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. For me, I was never really somebody who was I was very anti-horror. My philosophy for the last 23 years has been I have enough anxiety and horror in my life. I do not need to go and be like purposeful. I don't need to make myself scared. I can do that like just on a normal basis. And during the pandemic, that was something that like that I think that's one of the main things about me that's shifted. Is I'm like now a lot more into, like, I used to say, oh, okay, well, I'm into dark fantasy, I'm not into horror, which, I mean, considering my aesthetic, people are generally surprised by. And that and the fact that I've never been to a Hot Topic before, but we'll get to that later.
What? I am very shocked.
See? Look at the faces.
You don't need to go to a Hot Topic now. The time to have gone to Hot Topic was like 2010.
My mother's very into like vintage jewelry and vintage like authentic goth and alt stuff, so I didn't have to go to a Hot Topic because she'd be like, why are you getting these like cheap things when I found these sterling silver, like this cursed fucking like amulet from the 1950s, like, here, take this to school with you. But so I was never somebody that was super into horror until I had to get a little bit more familiar with just thinking about it during the pandemic. Like, I was somebody, like, I'm still somebody who's like, I'm autophobic, so my fear was being alone, and then I was like in lockdown by myself for like over a year. So I started to like, I started to like think about that and like deconstruct that, and at the same time I started like, and I was always somebody interested in things that were more towards like Night Vale in terms of like the dark fantasy aspect, but then I started listening to the Magnus Archives during lockdown, and that kind of just made me deconstruct that. And then also I realized now that the thing that I was so adamant about not engaging with was horror from the lens that is most like given the spotlight, which is horror in a way that is meant to scare you, as opposed to horror that is either A, coming from a different lens for the person that is fighting against something, or horror from, like, say, a queer lens where you are actually invited into the perspective of the monster. And so now, like, I can be like, oh, I'm very, very into, like, actual horror, which is, or for me, which is, like, you know, horror that is aware of itself, I think, and not just like a shock value thing, which, I mean, definitely has its merit, but like I'm into now like queer horror, like eldritch horror, psychological horror, like black horror especially, and definitely Kenna, like watching your videos has definitely just helped me deconstruct and sort of like engage with that in a way. And also I've just had to look at a lot of Jordan Peele movies, because even if I don't want to be scared, I'm like, I need to support like black.
I'm rooting for everybody black.
Yeah.
When I was young, I used to just associate horror movies like slasher films, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I was like, well, I don't like those.
Exactly. Yeah.
And like, I don't like being startled, and there's like, I have really bad anxiety, and sometimes the thing that gets me is just narrative tension. Sometimes if the narrative tension gets too high, I'll have a panic attack because it feels too real.
Yeah.
Like, my husband tried to get me to watch Do the Right Thing, and that gave me a panic attack.
Do the Right Thing is intense, yeah.
When the cops killed Radio Raheem and then what's his face threw the chair through the window, I was like, okay, I'm having a panic attack right now. And it was just too real. It was just too real. And so I thought that I would never be the kind of person that like enjoyed horror. But yeah, it's partly because of Kenna's videos that I've like really been able to see horror like as an art form. And like what I do is I just read the synopsis of the horror movie on Wikipedia first, so I know exactly what's going to happen. Then I'm not startled, and then I'm like able to really like enjoy it for the sake of like analyzing the cinematography, as opposed to like being scared in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things to talk about with horror film is kind of like trauma informed horror movie watching, because like the whole point of horror movies is, and horror film theorists spend a lot of time differentiating between different kinds of fear, like horror and startled. That's a really big distinction in a lot of film theory. But horror as a genre generally is inviting feelings of anxiety, tension, claustrophobia, being watched, and those things can be like incredibly deeply triggering if you are somebody who in your real life has had like very big capital T trauma that's led you to feel that way. And so people are often very surprised to learn that like I watch horror movies like this, like I watch horror movies with my eyes closed, like I get scared. I'm a big baby about horror movies, but I love them. I think there's something really interesting and fascinating about a genre that is asking you to feel fear, not just because it wants you to feel something, but because it wants you to ask why you're scared of what you're scared of. And similar to what you were saying, Parker, I had a really hard time understanding why horror was such a popular mainstream genre, because so much of modern horror, more than like film has always come from a very white perspective, but horror film as a genre historically before the 1970s was counterculture. And so one of the really interesting shifts that you notice in horror film is that it's like we have this massive historical breakthrough with the casting of Dwan Jones in Night of the Living Dead, which was the first black lead in a horror film. And he doesn't make it to the end of that movie, but it is revolutionary in the fact that he makes it the longest in that movie. And also, George Romero was not originally going to kill off that character. It was like a really big deal when Dwan Jones was cast, because George Romero wasn't imagining a black person when he wrote the role of Ben. And so once a black man was cast, there was a huge conversation about, okay, how do we take this character and make sure that it's not a racist depiction? And so a huge part of the reason why Ben and Night of the Living Dead is so effective is because a lot of it was Dwan Jones' idea. George Romero was originally going to pull the ending where Ben gets shot by the kind of government-formed militia at the end. And Dwan Jones was like, no, I think you need to keep this, because the whole point of Night of the Living Dead is that it's communist filmmaking, and the zombies are meant to be an allegory for communism. And the point is that the most dangerous thing in that movie is not the zombies.
It's the
whole point. Exactly. And
wow. That is very effective.
Oh my
God.
Oh, I just got chills.
It's one of my favorite horror films ever made for a reason. But yeah, that almost was not the ending, because George Romero was like, I don't want this to, like, this communist film to be made at the expense of rehashing Black trauma. And that's really, oh God, sorry, I'm just getting excited because I love this movie so much.
No,
but
you're fine.
it's that
I
kind
didn't
of
know any of that.
idea. Yeah, it's Dwan Jones is inarguably one of the most influential Black actors in history. He was massive. He was also in one of the very first Black horror films ever made that got super popular. I want to say it was directed by Bill Gunn, but it's called Ganja and Hess, and it's basically like a Black horror vampire movie. That Yes, directed by Bill Gunn. It's a Black horror vampire movie that Spike Lee remade in the 90s, called The Sweet Blood of Jesus, because it's a Spike Lee joint, so it's always going to have a silly title. But it's essentially a Black horror film about the masculinization and the monsterification, if you will, of Black women. Like, essentially, the thing that everybody in that story is most afraid of is the Black woman and of her accessing her power. And so that's the biggest difference in between white horror and Black horror, I've found, is that when you're looking at Black horror, there's a level of consciousness at how, like, being Black impacts the story that a lot of white horror movies don't have. I think to this day, Night of the Living Dead is one of the best examples of what scholars distinguish between Black horror and Blacks in horror, with Black horror being horror that comes from a Black perspective, and then Blacks in horror, which nobody likes the word Blacks being thrown around, but scholars like to be short and punchy. But that basically refers to Black characters in white horror movies. And one of the things that's so well executed about Night of the Living Dead is that there's never a conversation about the fact that Ben is the only Black character in the room. It's never addressed. But a huge tension in the movie is that nobody wants to listen to Ben, and he's right all the time. All the time. Ben is like, if we do this, we will be fine. And most of the time when characters die, it's because they're effectively refusing to take his orders. And the subtext that gets created is that none of these white people want to consider that a Black man can be right. And that's ultimately what kills them. And that level of awareness of how being Black impacts how you're able to move through the story is something you don't find in a lot of white horror movies.
The main thing that I've noticed in terms of, like, just because there's a conversation about, like, the difference between, in media generally speaking, right? Like, there's always the conversation or the pushback of, like, well, if we have white people who can tell these stories, or who are, you know, who want to write about these things, like, why is it so important to not have a Black director instead of a white director, a Black actor instead of a white actor? And I think the difference is, like, or, like, you know, and obviously that broadens the narrative into, like, why is it important to have, like, you know, like, trans actors instead of cis actor? Like, it goes into all different kinds of, like, diversity and representation. But, like, at the end of the day, I really think it's just intention and experience. You're going to be, like, Black writers, directors, actors, like, producers are going to be able to bring so much more of that experience. It's not to say that, like, with enough sensitivity readers or, like, social awareness, that, like, somebody who's not of a certain culture wouldn't be able to tell a good story, but it would be a good story written by somebody not of a certain culture.
Yeah, why would we not want Black people to, like, have the career success of being the ones that get to make these stories instead of, like, continually, like, giving white people these projects?
No, I think it's like similar to what Parker was saying. It's like, it's interesting how that, like a lot of people don't realize how making a character Black in a story is going to fundamentally change what that character is, how that character experiences the world around them. That is why some people get confused when they see, like, me have a negative reaction to them saying, oh, well, Hermione is Black, or she can be Black, like, Rowling never officially said she was Black, whatever, because, like, A, she is described as being pale on more than one occasion in the books, but B, it's like, like Hermione's character would fundamentally change. It's not you can't just like race swap a character.
Hermione's whole thing was like the house elves are enslaved and I want to free them from slavery, and the house elves were like, actually we like being slaves, and and everybody around Hermione like laughed at her for trying to do that, and like trying to retroactively make Hermione black makes that even worse.
Yeah, that makes that whole storyline worse. And it also makes the whole like Draco calling her a mudblood. Like that's basically the N-word. Like
it is definitely like the entire thing of Harry Potter is like, there's wizard Nazis, and also like if the word muggle just sounds a little iffy sometimes.
It's a slur. It's fantasy slurs.
It's a slur. It's a fantasy slur.
White people's obsession with those has always
oh
my god, they're so obsessed with slurs. You're right. Like even in like Game of Thrones, like wildling is a slur.
Okay, like, and also, can we just say, I don't know about you guys, but I've been a part of like multiple projects where I've like been brought on as like a voice actor or like just somebody who's in the room with like a white creator, and I'm helping them out with their projects, and every single time there is a slur in their like high fantasy, high sci-fi thing, it's always like, oh my god, I've been wanting to say this for years. There's like this whole thing where like every single time there's like a fantasy slur, it's automatically like, this is basically the sci-fi version of the N-word, or this is basically like the high fantasy version of the N-word. Every single time I'm in a writer's room that is spearheaded by like a white person, they only have that context for how bad a word is, and it's like, you can just say that this is like a no-no. Like you don't have to compare it to the end. Like we get the gist of it.
Okay, I had two things that I want to say, and I'm gonna forget what they are.
Vibes. I should be taking notes.
First
My
off,
brain is all over the place.
We all neurodivergent in this piece.
Yes. Was it you, Kenna, or somebody else that was talking about analyzing Birth of a Nation as if it were a horror movie?
That was me. Yeah, that's a really core.
It's the first horror movie, basically.
Yeah, it's never categorized that way, and that's where a huge part of the like theory that was developed that Black horror is its own genre and needs to be classified and discussed as such is where that comes from. Is because the experience of watching Birth of a Nation, it's completely different depending on whether you're Black or if you're white, and that's something that was true in 1950.
Yeah, in different directions.
Exactly. What changes depending on who you are sitting as a member of that audience is what the monster is. If you're a white person, you watch that movie and you see a movie about the threat of Black people against the United Aryan race, and if you are a Black person watching that movie, you see the truth, which is that white people are putting all of their problems on you. I don't know if I don't think anybody should ever have to watch Birth of a Nation, like sincerely.
So many people are like, oh well, it was so important to film history, you should at least watch it once to understand. It's like, do we?
You really don't have to. Like, listen, nobody wants to say this, but I will. Birth of a Nation's not just racist. It's a bad movie. Like, it's a really bad movie. There's an inexplicable incest plot between two of the white people. It's like, what is up, we're gonna blame slaves for the Civil War, which blew my mind. I've seen a lot of hot takes on the Civil War that were looking a little alt-right, right? Birth of a Nation was the first time I've ever seen somebody genuinely be like, and you know what? The slaves were the ones who encouraged the Civil War. I've never seen somebody, like, you understand slaves did not have political power, right? Like, we were canvassed on that one. We were not
Can we talk about white people's obsession with incest plot lines for a second, though?
I feel like every time we talk about media nowadays, and we analyze like white media, like, you know what, this is the same conversation we had when we were discussing House of the Dragons.
Yes. Well, on that point, On that point, like talking about incest in media, it's not just fantasy media. Like they make the excuse like, well, House of the Dragon is supposed to be like medieval fantasy, and like medieval kingdoms did like have a lot of incest. But do you notice that like there was that tweet thread that went viral not too long ago that a lot of modern Black comedy has bizarre levels of incest suggestion, like Life with Derek, like the relationship of Ross and Monica and Friends, like just bizarre levels of suggestion.
You said like Black
the Folgers commercial of old.
Yes. I thought
you said Black comedy. Yeah, I thought you meant like Black.
No, but white comedy.
Okay, yeah,
because I was
thought
like,
about Life with Derek.
I don't remember that in Living
No,
Single.
okay, I didn't. I meant white comedy. A lot of white content has like an incestuous vibe to it, which is weird.
Star Wars, they do that weird ass cop-out thing
Star
where they're like,
Wars,
well, they didn't know they were siblings when they kissed, but you did. You, the writer, made a conscious choice to have a brother and a sister and make them like you did that.
Just real quick, speaking of Living Single, did you notice that the set that I designed for our little Sims intro was like based off the Living Single set? I put a lot of thought and effort.
That's awesome.
And then I said Friends, and then you were like, speaking of Living Single.
Yeah, because you thought we were talking about Black comedy.
Speaking of the better version of that show.
The other thing I was gonna say. Also, can we all agree that Overton is autistic? Can we just put that out there? Also, the thing I was gonna cycle back to zombies. So I want to talk about zombies for a second as like a metaphor for whatever social movement white people are afraid of at the time.
Yes.
Because like the big walking, like that was very like anti-immigrant, I feel like. And what's interesting is that Terry Pratchett does like a sort of pastiche of this within Discworld. The main zombie character, my beloved, his name is Reg Shu. He's a zombie anarchist, and he has started a movement called the Dead Rights Movement, and it's called the Fresh Start Club, and he like writes graffiti on walls that says like undead yes, unperson no, and he has like little pins that's like great to be gray, and it's like all
it's better than spew pins.
Yeah. all of his slogans. And like so much of the dead rights movement was taken directly from the queer rights movement, but he just didn't make any of the undead characters canonically queer. He like wanted to use the aesthetics of queer activism without committing to like actually making Reg gay. And like that drove me insane. And also like he was sort of the butt of the joke, just like Hermione, where everybody, his activism was treated as like a ha-ha, like he tries so hard. And it's like, yeah, it's because he's an oppressed minority. Like, do you want him to just ignore that? There was like a prequel like Discworld book that went like back in time 30 years to like a revolution, and like back when Reg was like a teenager, and this whole thing was he was just like so gung-ho about revolution, and everybody was just kind of like ha ha, like it was very sort of like Barricade Boys, like I just learned the expression downwardly mobile white leftist. But that was sort of like placed on Reg, like, oh, it's just like some white kid that just like is really gung-ho about revolution but doesn't know what he's doing. But then like when you really think about his character,
syndrome, yeah.
Yes, when you really think about his character, it's like he has like no family. Like he's for all intents and purposes like an orphan. Like why do we assume that he is privileged and coming at this from a place of like appropriating revolution? Because what Reg reads to me as is someone who is deeply passionate about justice but doesn't understand social cues. What does that sound like to me? Side note, literally every character in Discworld is autistic. I will not be dissuaded from this.
Not be taking questions at this time.
No, not at all.
Sorry.
I think what might be a good idea, actually, looking at the time, is to do a little ad break.
All right, yeah, that's a good point. Good time for a bit of an ad break. So we are going to continue to promote our various social platforms. Those are all going to be in the description. Also, I'm going to take this moment to plug Awesome Socks Club. It is a It is a product by my mutual Hank Green with the Green Brothers, and it's the whole purpose of it is to sell these sock
Casual
subscriptions,
flex.
and it's only open, and it's only
Casual
the
flex.
sign up window is only open for a limited period of time, but you can sign up for like a year's worth of, it's like a sock subscription service. All of the socks are designed by various artists, and those artists are paid, and all of the money, the profit, goes towards Sierra Leone and helping make childhood mortality rates, like lower them, like help with maternal care in Sierra Leone. And so it's a really cool, solid ethical project that I've worked with before. And I have a link, which I'll put in the description if I remember to do so, which is like an affiliate link. So it does help me out a little bit, but it also, helps the good cause, and you can go and get socks. And the socks really are very nice, very comfortable socks. So I'd like to plug that in. I'd also like to plug my YouTube channel, which I had mentioned before, but I'll put that in the description. But my fiance, they've been doing a lot of video editing lately, and they have a video that they just uploaded that they worked really, really hard on. Please go and give them some views and support. And we both make videos on that channel, so you'll see both of us on there.
Wordy and nerdy.
Yeah, and I'll have it in the description.
And also something that we didn't mention last time is that if you are listening and you're like, I have a business and I want to advertise on this cool podcast, shoot us an email at closeencountersoftheblurredkind@gmail.com.
And we will put that in this description as well, the contact us email.
Kenna, do you have anything to promote? Tell us about your Patreon, if you have any projects coming up.
Oh, no, I don't really have anything going on. I'm kind of on an official hiatus, I guess. I'm kind of trying to, slow it down, take a break, figure out my real life. But I do have a Patreon. My current TikTok account, because I just real low key deactivated at 250K and was like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. If you're looking for me, I am now at Mouse Abolition. I'm also Mouse Abolition on Twitter. And I don't remember my Instagram handle, but if you find my TikTok, you can find that. I have a link tree in the TikTok account, so I just kind of let that speak for it. I don't explain my handles anymore. I just because I'm not trying to grow. I'm not trying to promote.
Weaver, do you have anything to
I want to tell everybody about Primordium again. Currently, Primordium is just once a week on Tuesdays, and the co-hosts rotate choosing the readings. We do a read aloud around 6:30 Eastern Standard Time on my friend Madeline's Twitch channel, The Eclectic Library, and that read aloud is open to everybody. But if you would like to participate in the group discussion in the Primordium Discord server, all you got to do is subscribe to one of us on Patreon. This won't go out prior to this week's Primordium, which is a shame because this week I have chosen the reading. It is the short story Smoke, Lilies, and Jade by Richard Bruce Nugent, who was a really important figure of the Harlem Renaissance. He was only 19 when he wrote it, and it was the first work by a Black author to directly address themes of homosexuality. And not just that, there's an interracial bisexual polyamorous triad. It's all written stream of consciousness. Yeah, he was 19-year-old trailblazer. He was a homeless bisexual teenager who just couch surfed at Zora Neale Hurston's house and Wallace Thurman's place.
What a flex.
Right. And the reason why this stream of consciousness style is so distinctive is because he had written the final draft of this piece, and then the day before it was supposed to go to print, Zora Neale Hurston's brother accidentally lit it on fire. And then he had a cry about it, and Zora was like, I believe in you, you can do it. She handed him a stack of wrapping paper and a roll of toilet paper, and he got on the subway and tried to rewrite his short story from memory on a toilet paper roll while riding the train. The magazine that it was supposed to go to is called Fire Magazine, and ironically, all of the copies of that magazine were destroyed in a fire a couple months later. Yeah, it's a whole. I need to make a whole video about that. But like, fire was largely
that's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Fire was largely like panned by like black critics like W.E.B. DuBois, who's like, oh, this is just licentious and it talks about gay people and prostitution and blah blah blah. And if you're gonna
first of all, W.E.B. DuBois can kiss my ass. Like, he was not as progressive as people think he was.
He was progressive for white people. He was saying things they
Zora Neale Hurston called him Dr. Dubious.
He was like, play the white man's game so that we can.
She was right.
Yeah, she was right.
Also, can I just say that I haven't been able to take W.E.B. Du Bois's name seriously ever since the "oh shit, it's that boy" meme came out. Because every time I hear his voice, I'm like, W.E.B. Du Bois, like it's the boy. And like it, I've given
that is so funny.
Like that's. I know. It became a vocal stem for me for a while. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
But promoting.
Parker, did you have anything to promote?
Oh yeah.
Last but not least.
So there's I'm so sorry. God, I've been in enclosure for such a long time. So I Patreon and YouTube are my primary things. YouTube, support the Patreon so that I have more stuff on YouTube so I don't have to work as much in my day-to-day. The Patreon has exclusive, like, in case people don't know, I'm also a musician. I have like demos and other projects and stuff up on Spotify, SoundCloud, Tidal, and all other forms of listening to things. Like my stage name for that is Witch Hazel, but I have like song demos for things that I haven't released yet at all stages of production that are up on Patreon, as well as poems. I've got my fanfiction username is accessible to certain patrons in case you want to do that. It's not only accessible to my patrons. You can find me in the wild, but if you want the direct contact for my Spider-Man Deadpool smut, my Patreon has a bunch of cool stuff, as well as patron exclusive Q&As, full set photo shoots that I've done, a bunch of really weird, vaguely threatening messages telling you to take care of yourself. My Patreon is HumbleTortoise, my YouTube is HumbleTortoise. Just go and support that. I will not say my archive of our own username. I can't be perceived, but
Laszlo voice, I don't give a fuck, his name is Mike. My AO3 username is Singing Sorrowless. Go fucking read my fanfiction.
It's a very wonderful Venom fanfic.
So my Discworld fanfiction that I'm considering dipping back into for NaNoWriMo. I've got to. This is my fanfiction in which Samuel Vimes and Vetinari are like teenage boys that like have a very brief and very chaotic teenage romance, and then have like an extremely like toxic, volatile breakup, and it's like that's why they're like that to each other as adults. It's very angsty. Also, Red Shoe, my favorite fucking crust punk gay zombie, is also very prominent. I made Reg trans because I think trans zombies are like the idea. Okay, so this is like circling back to zombies. Within
that's the theme song of this episode.
Yes, within the Discworld sort of cosmology, the way you become a zombie is like through sheer like willpower. And they describe another trans zombie named Wendell Poons, who is like, when I'm reborn, I want to come back as a woman. He's like this elderly wizard that's like, I want to be reincarnated as a woman. And so it's like when he dies, when he dies, his consciousness is just sort of like floating, and then like the Grim Reaper of Death just doesn't show up to collect him. So he's like, well, I guess I'll just go back to where I was before. So he like re-inhabits his own body, and it's described as like every process of like every human biological process is still possible as a zombie, but none of it is on autopilot. You have to consciously, like with your brain, be puppeteering like every aspect of your body. So like if you want to eat, you have to consciously digest. And it's the idea of like being hyper aware of your body, and the idea that like a trans person could die and then come back purely through sheer willpower and be like, oh, I can just give myself top surgery and it's fine because I have full conscious control of what my body does. I'm finally able to consciously control everything about this body that before I felt trapped in, and now I'm immortal and can change myself any way I want. Fuck yes.
Me online at Claire's.
Yeah.
Me online at Claire's. Oh, I can just give myself top surgery vibe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm taking
top surgery at Claire's.
Can if I can circle back to zombies, I think that's going to be the catchphrase for this episode. So circling back to zombies. So two things. One, I've noticed a pattern in myself where whenever I go through not TMI, but whenever I go through like a really, really bad depressive mental episode, I will find a new piece of intricate zombie media and consume it. I don't know why. It's always zombie media. I don't actively seek it out, but like all of my comfort stuff when I've been at like the lowest points in my life in the last like 10 years, I've like that's how I found iZombie or started watching iZombie. That's how I found In the Flesh, which have you Okay, yeah, see, Kenna, you're okay,
like
so
Flesh,
which
yeah.
brings me to my next point. Side note, why the fuck did they cancel that? But so In the Flesh is this it's the reason why it popped up for me like mentally is because you were just mentioning like the correlation between that sort of like sort of queer like rights kind of vibe and then also zombism.
Zombism.
In the Flesh.
Zombism.
Love that word.
No, we're
like, we're with
clarifying
you.
that. That is
We're with you.
We're gonna start like a glossary of terms, and that's gonna be on there.
I just have these casual like lore and like myth related terms in my head that I remember like aren't things that people also
100%.
say.
No. They can be now. Now they are.
Yeah. Fuck yeah. Lex.
But yeah, so In the Flesh does this really interesting thing where it's not to delve too far off of black horror. I guess this would be more of a queer horror story because there's not that many black people in the flesh. But so there's they do this thing. So the zombies, the basic premise of it is that the zombie apocalypse happened. They found a cure. It's over now. The zombies that were zombies can now be rehabilitated and re-enter society. It's amazing. It's canonically queer as its main plot line. The main character is amazing. When Kieran lost his shit at his family, I was like, that's my baby boy. His little sister was a part of a militia, like an anti-zombie militia that protected the town. And now suddenly like half of the people that all of these people in the town thought were dead and like zombies are now suddenly back. They call them partially deceased syndrome sufferers. They have to take pills, they have to wear contacts, they have to put foundation on. Obviously, there's this whole sort of thing where it's like some zombies are like, well, this is a thing that happened to me. It's now part of my identity. I'm not going to wear contacts. I'm not going to do whatever. Meanwhile, the militia from this like this small town that Kieran's from called Worden, I think, is they're very much like, if we catch any of you corpses without your makeup, without your contacts, or like in any way being proud of your like zombie whatever, like we're going to be like they shot an old lady in the street. It was crazy. But yeah, she was a zombie. Like it's heavy and it's horrific, but it's like and it's white. It is white, but it's one of those things that's like informed about what it is. And because it's queer as well, it's very much different from like if there had been like a sort of like cishet telling of that. But anyway, second thing that I wanted to say is so zombies being reflective of whatever sort of like mass white fear is happening at the time. After, you guys remember the zombie boom, it happened at the same time as XD and the mustache thing, like the hipster
millennial
hate
cringe
and hipster craze.
It was such a distinct
the
time.
millennial cringe height. Like the zombie things were everywhere, and that was a very like post 9/11 xenophobia thing that like
100%.
happened in it's like this nameless, faceless monster thing that we are now allowed to hate because there is no way that it could change.
Kind of on that note about like, the monsters representing fears and stuff and queerness and stuff, it reminds me of kind of on a different note entirely, because this is children's horror, but you think about like the Monster High, like the
Yes,
Monster High
yeah,
dolls
yeah.
and stuff like that whole, and they had the show.
My friends are at a Monster High themed burlesque show a couple weeks ago.
I love it.
Yes.
It was so good.
Love it.
That rules.
Yeah, and like Monster High has, I think they actually have some canonically like queer or non-binary characters now. They were known for like being a kids show that was like had a lot of diversity that a lot of other kids shows did not have, and they like delved into the whole like, you know, these characters. Some of them are zombies, and some of them are, you know, vampires or whatever. Most of them are not characterized as villainous, but they are like sort of in this society. And even another thing that I'm just now thinking of, also Disney Channel. So Disney Channel has the Descendants trilogy, which is all about like the villains and like their tension between being a child of a villain and then the children of the heroes. But also they have the zombie series on Disney. Now I've never watched it, but it's a thing on Disney that like has a very similar vibe of like, you know, like zombie racism, and like some of the kids in high school are zombies and some of them are, it's like it's interesting to see some of this in children's media, because I think that children's media is often sort of like an indicative societal point. Like what we choose to make media for children often reflects the values that society itself has or wants to have.
I was in a call with some of my Discord friends yesterday, and we were talking about Artemis Fowl and how a lot of people assume based on the name that it's like a fantasy book, but it's like, no, it's just some rich kid that's evil. And they were talking about like how novel it was to have a book targeted towards children where the main character is a child, but he's also just a bad person, and how like fun that was. Yeah, children should get to identify with villains. But I wanted to say, I only like recently learned about the phrase disidentification, which is where like you take something that like that has been put on you, that you've been like accused of, and you're like, well, if you think that's all I am, then I'm gonna be that on purpose because of that. Like that one thing that Tyrion said to Jon Snow, like, if you wear it as armor, it can never be used to hurt you. Like, and we see that so often with queer people, like, oh, if you think I'm a monster, then I'm gonna love stories about monsters, then I'm going to embrace that. And I like just started watching
the villains,
the Owl House, a couple days ago, and how that's so like one of the strongest themes of that is like people being accused of being monsters because they're different, and like allowing children to empathize with characters that are monsters, with characters that are taboo, I feel is really powerful. Another thing I wanted to say was, you, Parker, said that like when you're going through like really bad depressive episode, you like zombie media. And this is something this is something that ties back into Get Out, because when I am like in a really bad way, I gravitate towards stories with really strong themes of dissociation, because it makes me feel seen. And so like when I try to explain to people that like one of my comfort movies is Being John Malkovich, and they're like, comfort?
I've never seen Being John Malkovich.
It's fucking whack.
I've heard so much about it.
There's so much going on, and it's so fucking weird. And then also like there's this like a canonical trans character that I had no idea was, you know, like she yeah, like the premise of Being John Malkovich is there's like a portal that you can crawl through that like puts you into the mind of the actual real life actor named John Malkovich. He's like a real guy, and he's like in the movie playing himself. And so like they start this scam where people are paying to like experience life through John Malkovich's eyes, and John Malkovich is like vaguely aware of the fact that he's being puppeteered by a bunch of strangers. And like at one point the main character's wife like was like, well, I want to experience John Malkovich, and she like goes into his mind while he's like having a shower, and then as soon as she like pops back out of his mind, she was like, oh, I'm transsexual. Like, I know that definitively about myself now. I was briefly inside of a man's body, and now I'm like absolutely 100% certain that I'm trans. And I was like, oh,
cool. Interesting.
Yeah. But like Get Out with I was watching it last night with my husband. When Chris goes into the sunken place, and you can see like what he's seeing out of his eyes, but it's like really far away, like he's seeing it on a screen, and he's just sort of like floating in the void. I like hit my husband on the shoulder. It's like, that's what it feels like. That's what it feels like to have a dissociative episode. And it's comforting to see that someone else was able to put it into words, because so often that feeling feels so like nameless and amorphous. That like media like Bo Burnham's Inside, even though like Bo Burnham's kind of a shit guy in a lot of ways, but the way that Inside utilizes like the metafiction to reinforce the themes of dissociation, I find very comforting, because it's like, oh, he gets it, he understands what this feels like.
Yeah,
it's also.
I was gonna say I find that that Black horror and Black media and Afro-surrealism I find often has really strong themes of dissociation, and part of the dissociation that it feels so isolating, and it makes you feel like, you know, am I going crazy? Am I the only person that feels this way? And it's so fascinating because like leaning into Black media and like the research I've been doing over the past 2 years into the blues. And it's like, you can't listen to the blues and think that you are alone in these feelings. The blues was an entire genre of people going like, we are traumatized. We have experienced trauma and we're going to tell you about it. The themes of, because dissociation is a response to trauma, and Black people have always experienced trauma. Yeah. And I feel that Black horror and Black media in a lot of ways captures the sense of dissociation in like a really unique sort of like surrealist way, which is why like there are a lot of comparisons between Atlanta and Twin Peaks.
I want to hear what Parker has to say, but I also want to hear like more from Kenna, because we're like our guests, so we want to hear some Kenna.
I was gonna say, there's a level of, so two things. One, just very, very like side note is, I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, I think that loudly express, like the what was the thing that you said, disidentification, where somebody's like, if I say you are like, if you say I am this thing, I'm going to do this thing on purpose, which I think like the sort of like inherent meta commentary of taking something that is obvious about you but not talked about and then making it a part of your overall vibe is something that, like, I mean, obviously, like I think a lot of people who identify like me can relate to, but I think also just is now that I'm thinking about it, is such a pillar of like so many different kinds of Black media, of loudly being like, things are not okay. This is not the way that, like, as in, especially in response to systemic gaslighting and sort of systemic, like, just the way that these sort of like systems are built up in a way that's like, we're not going to talk about the fact that this is how we view you, or this is how you are, or these are the things that have happened to you. We're just not going to talk about them. And I think that like a lot of Black media, like you were talking about the blues, I would like say, like, not argue necessarily, but I would tack on that that's also like a very core pillar of like hip hop. A lot of like, you know, the Black foundations of rock were just, we have come from such a traumatizing place. This is loudly what that is. And making a I've been having this conversation so much, and it's very much a part of like my gender expression, and also just my experience with race is like, I am making a spectacle of all the things that are wrong, quote unquote. Whether I feel they are wrong or I am told that they are wrong, I'm now making it a spectacle. So we are talking about it. Like, going into the way that is related to Black horror as a medium is like, first off, like, if horror so often is indicative of the fears and the things that are not quite there and are not quite right, and like the horror that I've experienced, all the best horror that I've experienced, whether literally or not, is indicative, like it widely displays and accurately displays the feelings of being in your room at a place you were supposed to feel safe, having all the lights turned on, looking in the corner of your room and being like, something's there. Like, and I think Black horror does that wonderfully, especially like if we're talking about the dissociative scenes in Get Out. Side note, I'm afraid of teacups now, but like teacups and white people, two biggest fairs. We don't have time to delve into all that, but R.I.P. John Mulaney. But every time I make a reference, like, so many references.
Complete side note, but I saw John Mulaney live, not like pretty recently, like this year, and it was after all that shit had happened. And I bought my tickets way before all that shit had happened, so I was like, well, I guess I'm going. And so, and he's definitely adjusted his persona a lot. And when one of his opening things, he's like, yeah, I used to have this personality of being like a weird guy from the 40s, but now, you know, a bunch of public image stuff happened, and now everybody likes Bo Burnham better.
That's the thing about being white boy of the month.
Exactly.
By the time you've hit your peak, they've got the backup ready. They were priming Bo Burnham.
Everybody,
and also,
looks like
to
a
be
sexy
fair,
baby.
Bo Burnham never stopped being white boy of the month. He just left actively.
Yeah,
like,
he chose to leave and then chose to come back.
So going back, circling back to not zombies, but circling back to Get Out, is we're all neurodivergent here. So circling back to Get Out, like in terms of like the dissociation, it's just as I remember watching stuff with Jordan Peele and also like interviews after Get Out had first come out, and like people were like, where the fuck did that come from? And he's like, that's how it feels like to interact with white people in like white systems, like as a black person, is that dissociative thing. And it's so interesting too, because it is like, it is, and Us definitely gets into this. Oh, I get to talk about this. Us definitely gets into this in like a much more like overt way, but it is actively experiencing uncanny valley in your own reflection. It's like the dissociation, the inherent dissociation, and the inherent ways. And also I've been having a lot of conversations with people in my life, like just this week, about the ways that like mental like neurodivergence manifests differently when you are black, because it's like, am I dissociating because I have a dissociative disorder, or because I have to interact in this like system set up that it forces me to, you know, it's like, it's an uncanny valley thing to be forced, and like to say that it's not socially acceptable to not change the way that you speak, the texture of your hair chemically, the way that you stand, the way that you gesture, the things that you can admit to being into. Yeah, 100%. Like absolutely.
In the Primordium session, we talked about Afro-surrealism. And the D. Scott Miller in 2009 wrote his famous Afro-surreal manifesto, in which he says Afro-surrealism sees that all others who create from their actual lived experience are surrealist. And it's the idea of like, the thing that makes Afro-surrealism so powerful is that there are black people going into these situations which white people would find incredibly normal and mundane. And the fact that like your normal mundane reality is surreal horror for people that aren't you. It's like we are having to interact with the system where we're holding in the forefront of our mind, this doesn't make sense, the way these people are acting, the way these people are treating me, it does not mesh with logic. And for my survival, I have to sit here and pretend that everything is fine. And like I can see something's wrong and everybody else is pretending it's normal.
I think a good example of that is the end of Get Out, where like it's the difference in white and black perspective of the sort of like police lights that we see that actually ends up being Chris's friend. Kenna, I want to hear all of your thoughts.
Yes, I want to hear some from Kenna.
Hey there, folks. It's Weaver here after the fact. So we accidentally filmed this episode for 2 hours, and we ended up having to split it in half. And that means that the ending of this first episode, this first part, ends on a kind of weird note. We're like about to pump up Kenna because the three of us regular hosts realized that we have been talking for way too long, and we haven't given Kenna like enough of a chance to speak, even though like they're our guest and we invited them. So in part 2, Kenna will go a lot more in depth into this topic. Come back next week to hear Kenna talk more about zombies, Get Out, and a whole bunch of other stuff. All right, here's the outro. All right.
Yes.
Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you so much to Kenna for being our first guest. It has been having me. A wonderful experience having you on the show.
I'm gonna just say, if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And don't forget to check us out on the podcatcher of your choice if you want to listen to us on the go. And if you are podcast listeners, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. The reviews are really going to help us during these first few weeks. And if you're a podcast listener, be sure to check us out on YouTube because there's a lot of cool graphics. You get to see all our funny faces. I've noticed while watching myself in the little box, I make a lot of crazy faces. I'm like, and if you'd like to support us more directly, again, you can become one of our Patreon patrons. Those links are in the description. And again, if you'd like to inquire about being a sponsor, shoot us an email at closeencountersoftheblurredkind@gmail.com.
Also with the thing, if you are someone, not only if you want to sponsor, but even if you're just like a black nerd who wants to like potentially come on the show, email us, let us know what your thing is.
Finally, thank you to Jhariah for the use of the song Enter, A Beginner's Guide to Faking Your Death. What a fitting song title. As the intro and outro to our show.
Thank you to Kenna. Thank you to Jhariah. Thank you to Weaver. Thank you to Parker. Thank you to me. And thank you to all of y'all. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay blurty.